So that's brightness and contrast. Now we're moving on to levels. Levels is my favorite technique. I use this most. Right here you can see all the data from this image. From this data we can see that there's some really dark areas in the image as well as some really light areas, but there's a whole lot of mediums in this image. This is literally recording the lights in the photograph. For levels, we can move the dark areas inward to make the entire dark areas even darker, which I'm going to go ahead and put it like right there. You can change the gray areas to make those lighter or darker. I'm going to keep those a little bit lighter. And we can bring in the white areas even brighter, but I'm going to keep those actually where they're at. And I really like the way that my image is starting to look. So levels lets you change the darks. Well, let's say levels lets you change the blacks, the grays, and the whites in your images. So go ahead and write that down. Levels lets you change the darks, mediums, and lights in your image. The next tool is curves, and I'm just going to show you how not to use curves. And you can, in the description, I want you to write down to not use curves very often. So here we see, if we move the line, we can have some crazy things happening to our images. Sorry, you guys might be able to hear my cat. I'm sorry, she's meowing. So curves can do some crazy things, and it really can mess with your photo. Like, look at how insane that looks. I would say to stay away from curves unless you're just doing some minor changes and just moving the line just a little bit. But I'm going to go ahead and put my line pretty much back to where I want it, and I'm going to delete this part. And this is the history tab, so I'm going to go back to before I did curves. Awesome. So on curves you can write, don't use curves very often. You can play around with it, see if you like it, but I would probably not use it very often. The next part is exposure. Exposure lets more light into your entire photograph. So a lot of kids ask me, what's the difference between exposure and brightness? Brightness only lets the lights into your light areas, whereas exposure will let light into your entire photograph. So as we can see, when we bump up the exposure, it makes almost the whole entire image white. When we decrease the exposure, it makes the whole entire image black. So if you have a photo that's just already very dark, you're going to want to increase your exposure. If you want, you can play around with offset, which kind of makes your image look a little hazy as well. But I'm going to go ahead and press Ctrl Z and go back to normal. Next up is vibrance. Vibrance increases the intensity of your colors. Vibrance increases the intensity of your colors. So as we increase the vibrance, you'll notice that the colors are getting even more rich. They were already pretty rich to begin with and pretty intense to begin with, but you can see that the more we increase the vibrance, the more intense they get. So I'm actually going to bring my vibrance just back down because I don't need a super vibrant image right now. The next thing is saturation. You want to be very careful with saturation because on people, saturation tends to make people look like Oompa Loompas, and they turn really orange. So saturation brings more warmth into your photo, so it makes it more warm. So let's go ahead and do that. As you can see, she's starting to look like she got a very bad spray tan. So we don't want to increase the saturation very much on a person. You can increase it maybe a little bit to just make them look a little healthier, but don't play too much with saturation. So that was vibrance. Let's go to hue and saturation. Hue and saturation is super fun. Hue allows you to change the overall tint of your photograph. Tint. When I say tint, it means the overall colors in your photograph. So it changes the overall colors. As you can see, as I move this, whoa, it's super psychedelic. It literally is like a picture show. It's so crazy, like a movie. But you can change your hue just a little bit if you don't want your image to be as red and you want it to be less red. You can go change it. Obviously, you want her skin tones to stay pretty natural, so I'm going to keep it at 0. And then you can even increase the saturation specific to that hue right here as well. So hue and saturation changes the overall tint of the color. Next up is color balance. Color balance changes the specific colors in your photo. So as you can see, if I want my picture to be less red and more blue, I can change that specific color. If I want it to be more magenta or more green, I can change that specific color. It does very similar things to the hue and saturation, so color balance is kind of similar to hue and saturation. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and delete both these hue and saturation stuff because they didn't really apply to my image. The last but not least is this beautiful little button that's so simple, black and white. This changes your image into black and white, and you can also go in and change specific areas and make them brighter or darker. I'm not going to put my image in black and white. I like it in color. Okay, so now that we've edited our image, now it's time to save your image. So you're going to, actually first let's learn how to merge layers and then we'll save. So in order to move this image onto this background, we have to merge all of these little layers that are over here. If we try and move it right now, you might notice that it won't let me move. So we're going to go ahead and merge these layers by clicking on the first layer, holding down Shift on your keyboard, and clicking on your last layer. Then you're going to right-click and click Merge Layers. I'm going to do that one more time. Click on the first layer, hold down Shift, and click on the last layer. Right-click, Merge Layers. Now we only have one layer, so it should be pretty easy to grab it. Oh, I messed up, sorry. Grab, linger, bring it in, drop. And you press OK, and then I can change the size again, Control-T, make it smaller, and put it right here on our image. I can also use the text tool, which is over down on the left-hand side, the horizontal type tool. Click on that and make a text box. And if this is my image for space, I can go ahead and write out space. I can make it bigger. Let's make it even bigger than that. Let's go to 30. Okay, and I can put it wherever I want in the picture. I can put it down at the bottom. I could also even press Control-T and rotate it. Put it going up the side. I don't think that's really straight. I'm going to make it a little more straight if I can. So as you can see now, I have space written on there, and I could also use my text tool to write the name of the assignment. Elements of Art by Miss Briggs. And I can put that in the bottom corner, like that, and then I'm going to add all my other pictures as we go. Awesome. So that's how you'll move your image. Make sure all your images are cropped into a square. If we are not finished with this project, like I'm not finished with this, but I need to go home and I need to go finish doing some other things, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. File, Save As. And when you save it on your computer, it should automatically save Photoshop. You only want to save it as a Photoshop file when you are not finished. So I could write not finished right here, and I'm going to save it as a Photoshop file. But if you are finished, this is really, really important. If you are finished with this photo, you always want to go to File, Save As, and save your image as a JPEG. So make sure to write that down on your notes where it says JPEG, JPEG. You're going to save it as a JPEG and name it Space Photo and put it in your student folder. When you save it, make sure you save it as a JPEG. Otherwise, it'll take up way too much storage in your computer. Okay, so I think that's all that is on the notes. If you have any further questions, you can let me know and I can go over things. But this is just a really brief tutorial. Not really brief because it's 20 minutes long, but I'm going over all the things that we talked about in class. Hopefully you got the notes, and good luck.